Pinevale, Oregon, summer 2025. The rain had just stopped when Diego Alvarez rode his rusty bike along the dirt road behind the trailer park. 13 years old, sunburnt and wiry, he carried a worn-out backpack stuffed with aluminum cans, plastic bottles, and scraps of rusty metal. He had walked more than 2 miles from the town dump to the edge of Pinevale just to squeeze in a few more finds before sundown. Pinevale was a town no one came to, and even fewer talked about. Wooden houses lined the cracked main road, surrounded on all sides by thick pine forests. Once a bustling paper mill town, it had slowly faded after the mill closed in 2015. Life had frozen here, along with a story everyone tried to forget. Diego lived in an old RV parked outside town with his mother, Maria. She worked as a hotel cleaner, earning barely enough to keep them fed. Every evening, she'd ask, "Did you find enough today?" Not out of greed, but because dinner depended on it. Diego was used to being invisible, no school, no friends, no dreams, but there was one thing he couldn't stop wondering about: the Camden family. People whispered their name like a ghost story. Back in the winter of 2015, they vanished. No bodies, no goodbye, no suspects. Police said they might have skipped town due to debt, but some of the older folks said they never left Pinevale. They were buried with it. Diego had passed the Camden house many times. An abandoned 2-story cabin at the forest's edge, its windows shattered, roof sagging. He'd never dared go in. But every time he passed it, the air felt colder, not from the wind, from something else. That day, Diego stopped by old Lester's garage. The man liked to drink and mumble. Diego knew, drunk men sometimes spoke truth. "Mr. Lester," Diego asked as he dug through the scrap bins, "did you know the Camdens?" Lester looked at him with foggy eyes, paused, then tightened his shoelace. "You shouldn't ask about them, kid. Folks here pretend they never existed. But did they really disappear? Or?" The old man sighed, glancing toward the pine woods. "Here's what I know. That boy, Nate, he came running out once, crying, covered in blood. Then, he vanished. No one saw him again. And from that day on, this town shut its heart." Diego swallowed hard. A gust of wind carried the smell of burning plastic and damp pine. Something was buried in this town, and for some reason, he had stepped too close. On his way home, Diego passed by Old Man Howard, the homeless veteran living near the forest's edge. The old man was building little wooden crosses from sticks. When he saw Diego, he smiled, a strange, knowing smile. "Leaves can't cover guilt, boy." Diego stopped. "What did you say?" Howard didn't answer. He just looked into the forest and whispered, 10 years. That child still waits for someone to come back." Diego woke up earlier than usual. The Oregon sky was shrouded in a pale mist that hovered between the pine trunks. Sunlight sliced through the branches in narrow blades. He quietly slipped the hand-drawn forest map into his backpack, along with his old folding knife and a single granola bar. He didn't tell his mom. She would worry, but he also knew, if he didn't do this, he'd never sleep soundly again. The trail into the western woods was narrow and uneven. The pine needles blanketed the ground, muffling his steps with soft crunches. An owl called somewhere far off. The air smelled like wet bark and sap. Still, Diego wasn't scared. He felt something else, like he was being guided. Half an hour later, he stopped in front of a pine tree with a jagged, lightning-split top, exactly as the map had described. Beneath the soil and old leaves, he began to dig. Dirt smeared his arms. His heart pounded. Clank. Metal struck metal. A rusted tin box, dented at the corner. Diego dropped to his knees, pulled it free, and opened it. A rush of mold and time hit his face like cold air from a grave. Inside was a faded teddy bear, missing one glass eye, and a folded letter, fragile, ink-smudged. Diego unfolded it and read, line by trembling line, "She's so cold. I wrapped her up, but she won't breathe. Mommy, I'm sorry. I tried to keep her alive. I prayed. I didn't eat so she could have more. But she won't open her eyes anymore." Diego froze. His hands shook as he gently lifted the cloth at the bottom, revealing small bones. Carefully placed, roots had grown through some of them. Tiny milk teeth remained in the jaw. A child, maybe 3 or 4 years old. Diego fell backward, gasping. His vision spun. He wanted to run, but then came a whisper. Nate, I'm cold. It was soft, like wind, or maybe inside his own head. He spun around. No one. He clutched the letter. No, he wasn't crazy. This was real. This was evidence. He pulled out his phone and photographed everything, the site, the bones, the letter. Then he carefully restored everything and planted a pine twig upright in the ground, a silent marker. On the way back, his mind was blank, as if the forest had taken something from him. But his eyes, they no longer belonged to a boy. They were the eyes of someone who had seen what others tried to bury. Rachel Simmons arrived in Pinevale under a gray sky. Fog still clinging to the pine tops and old rooftops. Her dusty SUV pulled up to the only coffee shop in town. Heads turned, not out of curiosity, but with a wariness that had long been part of Pinevale's silence. Diego was waiting outside, hoodie up, clutching a worn file folder filled with photos, letters, and notes. He wasn't sure he'd done the right thing. But after rereading Ellie's letter 5 times the night before, he knew silence would mean she'd stay forgotten forever. Rachel, early 30s, sharp ponytail, eyes like scalpels, shook his hand firmly. You must be Diego. I didn't expect a kid with this much backbone. He gave a small, nervous smile. I didn't expect to care this much either. But Ellie deserves someone to speak for her. After hours reviewing the findings, Rachel insisted on visiting the Pinevale Municipal Center to request records on the Camden family. At the front desk, a tired man typed briefly into a computer. Camden? He frowned. No records. Maybe you've got the spelling wrong. Rachel slid a photo across the desk, Ellie's birth certificate from Diego's picture. Then why does this document list a Pinevale address, birth date, and father's name as Brian Camden? The man shut off his monitor. I can't help you any further. Rachel didn't argue. She recognized that kind of silence, the kind that's been ordered. That evening, Rachel and Diego drove out to the Camden house. Just before dusk, the 2-story cabin stood beneath thick moss, leaning slightly as if tired from holding back memories. The path was overgrown with weeds and vines. Has no one entered in 10 years? She asked. They say it's cursed, Diego answered. Rachel flicked on a flashlight. They stepped through the door. The wooden floor groaned. A heavy smell of mildew and bat droppings hung in the air. The living room walls still bore crayon drawings, a family of 3 under a pine tree. In one corner stood a half-collapsed brick fireplace. Rachel knelt, tapping at the floor, hollow. They pried up several bricks. Beneath the ashes, they found a thin wooden box. Inside it, a cassette tape and a wrinkled scrap of paper. Rachel carefully picked up the tape. The handwritten label said, Ellie, last time. Back in the SUV, Rachel inserted the tape into a portable player. A child's voice trembled, barely holding back sobs. Don't cry, Ellie, Mommy will be back soon, please don't go. Then only crying, endless crying. Diego stared ahead, unmoving. The air inside the car was thick and heavy. Rachel pressed stop. We have enough to shake this town. Maybe more, but we've also just opened a door some people never wanted anyone to find. Rachel sat in her motel room just outside Pinevale, staring at her laptop screen as the cursor blinked over the search bar. Her fingers hovered, then typed with certainty, Brian Camden military record. Nothing, not even a confirmation he existed. She leaned back. Not even in cases of sealed personnel files had she seen this level of restriction. Whatever Brian Camden had been part of, it wasn't a simple service file buried for privacy. This was deliberate erasure, the kind applied to men whose actions the government didn't want traced back. Her inbox pinged. Secure. Camden, urgent. It was from Ben Sloan, a retired Army intelligence officer and an old contact of hers. They had worked together a few years back on a cover-up involving a psych ward in a military base. Rachel opened the message. Don't pursue this on open channels. Camden served under Operation Longwatch, black files. Psychological discharge suspected but never official. Word is he was reassigned to domestic control. There were red flags. Paranoia. Isolationism. Hoarding. Religious mania. His family was listed as non-cooperative assets. You didn't hear this from me. Rachel stared at the words non-cooperative assets like they were knives. That's what they had become to him, his wife, his son, and baby Ellie. Not family, not people, just liabilities. She shut the laptop. Her breath trembled, heart racing. The truth wasn't just a missing family, it was a system that let a disturbed man bury his crimes under the guise of service. The next morning, Rachel and Diego met near the trail to the Camden house. Diego brought a small notebook filled with sketches and notes he'd compiled, drawings of the fireplace, the toy bear, and even the position of the bones beneath the pine tree. "I had a dream last night," Diego said softly as they walked. Ellie was standing at the tree, but she didn't look angry. Just waiting. Rachel looked at him. "You don't have to keep doing this if it's too much." But Diego shook his head. "No, someone has to remember her." They reached the house again. This time, Rachel wanted to find proof of Brian's mindset, something beyond whispers and tapes. In the basement, past collapsed shelves and mildewed books, she found a locked box, wedged between old ammo crates. Rachel picked the lock with a pin. Inside were several handwritten notebooks, a bundle of Polaroid photos, a torn U.S. flag, with the words, "Purity or Death," scrawled across it in red marker. Rachel flipped through the notebooks. They were manifestos, page after page of scrawled warnings, about the infection of society, the corruption of childhood, and calls to preserve innocence by containment. He had built a doomsday cult inside his own home, and no one had noticed, or worse, had chosen to ignore it. Diego held up one of the Polaroids. It was Nate, maybe 10 years old, covered in bruises, standing by the basement wall. And next to him, in a crib made of pallets, was baby Ellie. "She looks so small," Diego whispered. Rachel took the photo gently, swallowing her anger. "Let's go." That night, Rachel uploaded everything. The photos, the manifestos, the recordings, the coordinates of Ellie's grave, and scheduled them to be sent to 3 major news outlets if anything happened to her. Just before midnight, her phone buzzed again. Blocked number. She hesitated, then answered. A man's voice. Calm, calculated. "Ms. Simmons, you've seen more than you should. You're tampering with a case that's been closed for good reason." Rachel's voice was cold. "You closed it because it was convenient. Because it was safer. For the town. For the government. For everyone involved. Brian Camden is dead. Let the rest stay buried." Rachel froze. "He's dead? Buried under a different name. The woods protect more than just secrets." Click. The line went dead. The next day, Rachel drove out alone to the far north of Pinevale. Her gut told her to follow the final clue Ben had slipped in a follow-up message. Check Forest Service Files 2016. Emergency cabin fire near High Ridge Bluff. 1 John Doe. At the county records office. She dug up the old report. A fire destroyed a government-built Forest Watch cabin. A male body, badly burned, was found in the ruins. No ID, no dental match, buried as unidentified in the Pinevale cemetery. But what caught Rachel's eye was the firefighter's testimony. Found remnants of military gear, ammo belt, pages from a scorched field manual. The guy must have been ex-something. She checked the date, March 4, 2016, less than 2 months after the Camden family disappeared. Rachel looked up, pulse quickening. Had Brian Camden burned himself alive to erase everything? Or was it a plant? By the time Rachel arrived at the Pine Grove, Diego was already there, pacing like a caged animal. His hoodie was soaked from the drizzle, and his shoes were muddy. The look on his face said everything before he even opened his mouth. "It's gone," he said, breath short. "All of it." Rachel followed him into the clearing. The little pine twig Diego had planted as a marker was snapped. The soil, once disturbed by Diego's careful hands, had been dug up again, and filled in like nothing had ever been there. No teddy bear, no bones, no rusted tin box. The tree stump beside it bore fresh boot prints. "Someone came last night," he whispered. They knew exactly where to look. Rachel crouched by the spot, pulling out her phone to compare the photos they took earlier. Even the leaf pattern matched. She zoomed in, faint drag marks. Not animal. Gloves. Maybe a shovel. Someone had done this surgically. Her voice dropped. They weren't cleaning up a crime scene. They were erasing a record. Back at the motel, Rachel spread out everything they still had: the cassette, the birth certificate, the Polaroids, and the transcripts of Brian Camden's manifestos. But now, without the physical body or the letter, their most visceral proof was gone. Diego sat silently on the bed, staring out the window. They'll take everything, won't they? Rachel didn't lie. They'll try. But why? Brian Camden is dead, isn't he? Diego turned to her. What if he's not? Rachel paused, uncertain. If he's alive, someone's protecting him. And if he's dead, someone's still protecting his image. Later that night, Diego remembered something, a name. In one of Brian Camden's manifestos, scribbled on the margins of a page, was a phrase: Ranger Huxley, won't comply. Knows too much. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Huxley? Diego nodded. Forest Ranger. I think I saw his name once on an old plaque near the park gate. Rachel searched local listings. The only surviving Huxley in the region was Caleb Huxley, 67. Listed as a retired Forest Service officer living in a cabin just past Iron Ridge, about 45 minutes from Pinevale. Into deeper woods. The next morning, Rachel and Diego drove through winding gravel roads. Fog clung to the treetops, and mist crept low across the valleys. They reached a small, weather-worn cabin hidden between two ridges, surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence. Caleb Huxley answered the door holding a shotgun. He squinted at them, beard gray, eyes sharp despite his age. You with the sheriff? He asked. Rachel shook her head. We're journalists. Worse, he grumbled, but after a beat, he stepped aside. Inside the cabin, the walls were lined with maps, Forest Patrol reports, and old photo negatives. Caleb poured black coffee into tin mugs and sat across from them. I know why you're here, he said. Camden. Rachel nodded. Did you know him? I knew of him. Didn't like him. Paranoid bastard. Got assigned to a Firewatch cabin in 2015. Said he wanted isolation. But the Rangers? We knew something was off. What do you mean? He put up motion sensors. Dug his own well even though he had plumbing. Barred the windows. Said he was protecting his kids from ideological contamination. Like the woods were gonna make them pure. Diego whispered. Was he alone? Caleb looked at him. No, not at first. Rachel pulled out the photos of Ellie's grave in the house. Caleb stared at them, jaw tight. We reported strange sounds one winter night, crying, shouting. I hiked out there myself. Found the place locked. Camden yelled through the door that everything was fine. I filed a report. They told me to drop it. Said he had top clearance. And after the fire in March 2016? Rachel asked. Caleb shook his head slowly. That wasn't a normal fire. They told us a propane heater exploded. But I saw footprints, small ones, leading away from the cabin. Bare feet. Rachel leaned forward. You're saying, someone survived? I'm saying the fire was staged. Someone left that cabin. Someone who didn't want to burn. Rachel and Diego sat in silence, the weight of it pressing against their chests. Nate, Diego whispered. He ran. He got out. Caleb nodded. Maybe. He could have been hiding in the woods. Or someone helped him. Rachel stood up. Can you show us where the cabin was? The old ranger hesitated, then reached for an old topographic map. He circled a remote area near Hollow Peak. You go out there. Be careful. There's more buried in those woods than bones. The photo haunted Rachel. She studied every pixel under the cold motel lamplight. A boy standing on the edge of a clearing, clutching the rusted teddy bear they believed had been buried with Ellie. The backdrop matched the coordinates Caleb Huxley had circled just hours earlier, the remnants of the watch cabin near Hollow Peak. The timestamp on the photo was just 2 days old. But the boy's face. Diego leaned in behind her. That's Nate. Rachel didn't respond immediately. The boy looked older than the last known photos of Nate Camden, lean. His face hollow but alert. His hair was matted, and his clothes were torn. But there was clarity in his eyes. Like someone who had seen too much and survived it. If it really was Nate, he had been living alone in the forest for nearly 10 years. The next morning, the sky was low and gray as Rachel and Diego set out for Hollow Peak. They parked the SUV off an old logging road, just as Caleb had instructed. Then began the 3-mile hike into the forest. The silence grew thicker the deeper they walked, as if even the birds were watching. Diego scanned the treetops, looking for movement. Rachel kept her phone in one hand and her pepper spray in the other. Halfway through the trail, they found it. The clearing. Blackened beams, melted metal, and fragments of foundation stones were all that remained of the old watch cabin. A pine tree had grown through the center of the ruin, as if nature had claimed what man tried to forget. Rachel stepped forward, camera raised. "We document everything." Diego nodded but froze mid-step. "Look, something had been recently disturbed, pine needles brushed aside, leaves crushed, not animals, footsteps." And then they saw it. A makeshift shelter, just 20 feet from the ruins. Constructed from branches, canvas, and rusted roofing tin. It was primitive but carefully built. Smoke still curled from a small fire pit nearby. Rachel's voice dropped to a whisper. "He's here." Inside the shelter, they found remnants of life. A torn comic book, an empty can of beans, a worn blanket, a notebook. Rachel opened it. Every page was filled with the same sentence, written over and over again in uneven, slanted handwriting. "I am not him. I am not him. I am not him." Rachel swallowed. "This is trauma," she whispered. Diego reached for a second notebook, this one thinner, with only a few entries. Dated crudely. March 7th, 2016. Ran. Fire behind me. Couldn't go back. April 2nd, 2016. Thought I saw Mom. It was just fog. June 12th, 2016. Buried Ellie. Under tree. No one will find her. March 2025. Saw people. Not safe. Must move. Rachel closed her eyes. "He's been watching us." Suddenly, a crack echoed in the trees. They both turned. Movement. Rachel stood. "Nate?" "Nothing." She raised her hands slowly. "My name is Rachel. I'm not here to hurt you. Neither is Diego. We just want to talk." No answer. Then, from behind a nearby tree, a figure stepped out. Thin, dirt-streaked, eyes wary but alert. The same boy from the photo. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He just stared. Diego stepped forward slowly. "Nate, is that your name?" The boy's lips didn't move. Rachel tried again. "You buried Ellie. We know. We found the letter." Nate flinched, just slightly. Then he whispered, barely audible, "You weren't supposed to." His voice was brittle, unused for years. But behind the rasp was sharpness. Recognition. Memory. Rachel knelt down. "We want people to know the truth. About what happened. About your dad. About you." Nate took a shaky step forward. Then stopped. "If they know, they'll come." Rachel's breath caught. "Who?" "Them. The ones who let it happen." And with that, he turned and ran. Not blindly, but fast. Practiced. Disappearing into the trees before they could follow. They didn't chase him. Rachel knew it would do more harm than good. Instead, she and Diego returned to the shelter and packed the notebooks, photos, and every shred of proof Nate had unknowingly left behind. By nightfall, they were back at the motel. Rachel sat in silence, rereading the last entry in the thinner notebook. "I saw them, a woman and a boy. They weren't like the others. They saw her grave. That means it's time." Time for what? She didn't know. Yet, Rachel had read thousands of declassified documents over the years, but never one that made her physically lean back in her chair. Palms clammy, heart drumming like this. Operation Longwatch, internal briefing, eyes only. Date: November 18th, 2013. Agency: Joint Task Division, DoD, DHS, Unnamed Psychological Arm. Summary: Longwatch was initiated as a behavioral isolation protocol, testing long-term effects of indoctrination, ideological control, and family-based confinement within high-risk demographic profiles. Candidates selected based on military or paramilitary training, religious leanings, anti-institutional behavior, and hereditary susceptibilities. Rachel's eyes scanned the names. Subject: Camden. Brian. Asset code 11B Harbor. Subject: Camden. Nathaniel. Category C, Child Unit, Observation Pending. Spouse: Noncompliant, Monitored, Unresponsive. Sibling Unit: Ellie Camden. Deceased during cycle. Noted as containment breach. Rachel couldn't breathe. They hadn't just ignored Brian's descent into delusion. They had assigned him, groomed him, used him. He had become a test subject, and his family. Collateral. Across the room, Diego stared out the motel window. He hadn't said much since seeing Nate. "Do you think he knows?" he asked quietly. Rachel looked up. "Nate? About what they did? That he was part of it?" She closed the laptop slowly. "I don't think he ever had a choice." Diego rubbed his arms. They watched him grow up like a lab rat. And now he's still out there, thinking he's the only one left. Rachel stood and paced. If this was a controlled environment, Pinevale might have been selected for its isolation. Its silence. Diego turned. "You mean, the town knew?" "Maybe not everyone," she said, "but someone did." Later that evening, Rachel made contact with Ben Sloan again, using an encrypted call through a satellite phone. His voice was scratchy, guarded. "You weren't supposed to find that file." "I know," Rachel said, "but I did, and now I want answers." Ben hesitated. Longwatch was shut down in 2015, officially. Off the books. It was still running until early 2016. The fire at the forest cabin? That was no accident. Camden was due for removal. But he lit the place himself before they could clean it up. Rachel clenched the phone. "And Nate?" Ben lowered his voice. They didn't expect Nate to survive. The protocol was to extract him later, under medical quarantine. But he ran before they could. Diego whispered nearby. "He escaped the experiment." Ben continued. "Someone high up wants this gone. They buried the reports. That letter you found, Ellie's, was never supposed to surface. Now it has. Which means they'll start tightening the noose." The next morning, a black SUV was spotted circling the motel. Rachel and Diego were already gone. They had driven through the night, deep into the highlands past Hollow Peak, following GPS coordinates pulled from the metadata of the surveillance photo of Nate. Rachel had run the image through an AI enhancement suite, which detected traces of a hand-carved symbol etched into a nearby rock, a triangle with a broken eye in the center. A matching pattern was flagged in Project Longwatch's symbology appendix as Observation Site, Class 3 Isolation Zone. They were headed toward it now. The trail became impassable by car, so they continued on foot. Snowflakes began to fall, the first dusting of the season, making everything eerily silent. After nearly 2 hours of climbing, they reached it, a stone bunker built into the hillside, barely visible beneath vines and moss. Metal door sealed shut, no lock, just a keypad covered in grime. "What do we do now?" Diego asked. Rachel stared at the numbers. Then, as if on instinct, she entered 03122016. March 12, 2016, the day Nate buried Ellie. According to his journal, the door clicked open. Inside, they found dust and darkness. Emergency lights flickered as if reacting to movement. Old filing cabinets, rusted monitors, and crates marked, Federal OBS, property do not remove. Rachel powered up a backup battery pack and connected her tablet. The terminal sprang to life. "Welcome to Site Echo 3. Access level restricted, personnel only." Using the Longwatch codes she had decrypted earlier, Rachel forced access. Files began to load, thousands of lines of observation logs. Brian Camden's sessions, recorded voice samples, psychological test results, environmental manipulation studies. Then, the audio. She clicked play. "Brian Camden, Session 43. The boy sees things I can't explain. He mimics my routines. He doesn't ask questions anymore. That's how I know it's working." Researcher note. Subject 11B appears unaware that Nathaniel has developed language segmentation outside of protocol. Suggest deployment of counter-narrative stimulus. Ellie, audio fragment, crying, "I want to go outside." Rachel closed the laptop, eyes full of horror. They were treating them like specimens. Ellie wasn't even allowed to leave the house. Diego whispered. And Nate. He wasn't being raised. He was being programmed. Suddenly, they heard footsteps outside. Quick, heavy. Rachel turned off the screen. "Someone's here." They extinguished the lights and moved silently toward the rear of the bunker, where an old maintenance tunnel led deeper into the hillside. Behind them, voices echoed at the entrance. "Search the site. Leave nothing." They didn't wait. Rachel stood at the edge of the ravine, the chill creeping beneath her jacket as she stared at the photo on her satellite phone. It was unmistakably her sister's apartment in Portland, same windows. Same fire escape, but taken from the outside. At night, the blinds were partially drawn, and inside she could make out the silhouette of her niece coloring at the kitchen table. Rachel's fingers curled around the phone, knuckles white. Diego stepped beside her. "What is it?" She turned the screen toward him. His face paled. "They know where your family is." Rachel's voice was ice. "They want me to walk away. This isn't just about Nate anymore. It's about leverage." She looked up at the treetops swaying overhead. The forest had gone quiet, unnaturally so. The kind of silence that warned of something just beyond the edge of understanding. Like the woods themselves were waiting. "We can't go back," she said. Diego nodded. "Then we go forward." They spent the next day off-grid, sleeping in an abandoned ranger cabin 2 miles west of the ravine. Diego used dry moss and flint to start a small fire, while Rachel backed up everything: documents, audio files, Nate's journals, onto 2 encrypted drives. One was hidden under a floorboard. The other went into her boot. "If they take me," she told Diego, "you find Caleb, you run, you tell the world." Diego didn't argue. He understood too well now. This wasn't journalism anymore. It was warfare by truth. That night, Diego couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Nate's eyes, hollow, alert, aching. A boy with no childhood, no future, just trauma folded over itself like burnt paper. "Do you think he's still watching us?" Diego asked. Rachel looked up from the files. "I hope so." "Why?" "Because it means we haven't lost him yet." The next morning, Rachel received a second message. This time, no threats, only coordinates. Latitude, 45.1402. Longitude, -122.5019. There was a note. "Come alone. 4 p.m. No cameras, no tricks, or she dies." Rachel felt bile rise in her throat. She knew the coordinates. It was an abandoned communications relay outside Pinevale, long since decommissioned. She also knew she had no choice. "I'm coming with you," Diego said. "No, I'm not a kid anymore. Not after all this." Rachel hesitated. "If something happens to me, then I'll make sure someone hears the story." She looked into his eyes. There was no fear left in them, only conviction. "Fine," she said, "but you stay hidden, no matter what." They reached the relay station at 3:45 p.m. The place was a skeleton of concrete and rust, its towers stripped of wires, its buildings hollowed by time. Graffiti covered every surface: tags, warnings, anarchist symbols, and once again, the triangle with the broken eye. Rachel approached the main structure alone. Her phone, camera, and bag were left behind. Inside, the air was musty with old wires and dust. Then, a voice echoed from the shadows. "You don't know what you're playing with." Rachel stood still. "Show yourself." A man stepped forward, late 50s, suit, clean-shaven, government type, not military, but something adjacent. His eyes were calm, detached, like he was already 3 moves ahead of her. "You're the reason we can't clean this up quietly," he said. "You had to poke around. Now you're dragging a child with you. Your people burned a family alive." He ignored that. "You have something we want. I have proof. You have breadcrumbs. We burned the loaf a decade ago." Rachel narrowed her eyes. "You created Brian Camden. You trained him. We tested control structures. Camden was a willing volunteer. You think we made him? He was us. We just let him be what he already was." "And Ellie? Nate?" The man tilted his head. "Collateral." A pause. Then, he stepped closer. "We're not monsters. We didn't kill the boy. We left him options. He chose the trees." Rachel clenched her fists. "You're afraid of him." He smiled thinly. "I'm afraid of what he represents. If he speaks, we lose the veil. Every town like Pinevale becomes a question mark. Every grieving parent becomes a lawsuit. Every politician who signed off becomes unemployed." He reached into his coat. Rachel tensed, but he only pulled out a flash drive. "Here's the deal," he said. "You publish nothing. You disappear. You walk away. In exchange, we give you what you really want." She stared at it. He smiled. "Your sister and her daughter. Alive, safe, untouched." From the shadows of the adjacent room, Diego watched it unfold. He had slipped inside through a side panel. His heart raced, but his grip on the phone stayed steady. He was recording everything. Rachel stared at the man. Then, finally, took the flash drive. But before she turned to go, she looked him dead in the eyes. "You're not burying this." He gave a small chuckle. "We already have, you just haven't realized it yet." She walked out. Outside, Diego emerged, pale but alive. Rachel said nothing. She handed him the flash drive. "We don't use this. Not yet. It's bait. They want us off their scent." Diego frowned. "So what do? We disappear. And then?" Rachel looked out over the ridge. "Then we find Nate again. And this time, we don't ask him to talk. We ask him to remember." A thunderstorm rolled across Northern California as Rachel angled the motel room blinds and pinned the printed map to the wall. Crimson dots, each one a living secret, bled across the paper like a spreading infection. Wyoming, Nebraska, West Virginia, 2 in Texas, 4 in Oregon, and a lonely mark on the Alaskan coast. The flash drive's file header insisted they were active. Diego sat on the bed, hoodie pulled tight, scrolling through the raw data Rachel had decrypted overnight. Site codes, supply shipments, quarterly, site metrics, personnel rosters filed under opaque initials. Between the schedules and inventory manifests, one detail kept resurfacing. Category C child unit, periodic field verification required. He shivered. "How many Nates do you think are out there?" Rachel didn't answer. She was tracing 2 dots that formed a rough diagonal line west to east. "Look at these. Echo 3. That's Pinevale, and ECHO 4. 200 miles southeast. Same resupply contractor. Same encrypted node address. They travel the same logistic corridor." She grabbed red string and pinned it between the marks. Classic detective board style. "Follow the trucks. Find the bunker." Diego's eyes flicked from the thread to her face. "You sure we're ready? They threatened your family." "That's the point," she said. "Longwatch doesn't just bury the past, it relocates it. We cut one root. The rot grows somewhere else. My sister's safety depends on ending the whole thing, not giving them more leverage." A knock rattled the door. Diego jolted. Rachel laid a hand on his shoulder, motioned for silence, then cracked it open. Caleb Huxley, the retired ranger, stood dripping rainwater. Behind him, Nate Camden, dirty hair plastered to his cheeks, clutched the mangled teddy bear like a talisman. His eyes darted around the room before settling on the map, widening with recognition and dread. 1. A language of red dots. Caleb spoke first. "He came to me last night, shaking. Said you'd need to see this." He offered a warped metal dog tag. The code etched into it matched Pinevale's observation site ID. Nate's voice was a gravelly whisper. "There are more." He stepped inside, tracing trembling fingers across the crimson dots. "He used to brag about them. My father said he wasn't just protecting us, he was proving them right. If someone escaped, there were other farms." "Farms?" Diego echoed, nauseated. "Places where they grow fear." Nate replied. Rachel swallowed hard. "Do you remember locations, landmarks, names?" Nate closed his eyes as if replaying nightmare reels. "Desert windmills. A church without a steeple. A town that smells like sulfur." Each phrase matched cryptic site notes Rachel had skimmed at ECHO 3. She passed him a marker. "Can you mark anything?" His hand hovered but didn't move. "I don't want to see the dots. I want to kill the map." 2. The alliance none of them chose. Rachel laid out her plan to Caleb and Nate. Track Echo 4's supply run. Intercept documentation. Drop evidence at 3 independent newsrooms simultaneously. Then, disappear long enough for public outrage to gain traction. Caleb snorted. "You're betting on outrage in a 24-hour news cycle?" "I'm betting on proof," she replied. "Names, budgets, dead children. Even spin doctors choke on that." Nate spoke again, a brittle determination sharpening each word. "I'll go with you." Rachel hesitated. He read the doubt in her eyes. "I've lived in those tunnels. I know their back doors. You'll die in there without me." Before Rachel could respond, her phone vibrated. Unknown number. A single text. Tracker disabled. 1 hour grace period. She snapped a glance at the window. No vehicles yet. Longwatch had evidently seated her SUV with a transponder, and someone friendly had just fried it. Ben, she whispered, pocketing the phone. We move now. 3. ECH04. Highway 19. Rain hammered the windshield as Rachel piloted Caleb's rust-red pickup south on Highway 19. Headlights slicing through sheets of water. Diego monitored CB traffic. Nate sat in the back, eyes glued to the road markers like they were ghostly milestones from his past. At mile 132, they spotted it. A white box truck idling at a gas-and-go. Driver in a gray parka checking straps on a tarped pallet. The license plate matched a shipping manifest from the flash drive. Rachel parked behind an out-of-order diesel pump. Caleb and Diego exited casually, circling the building. Inside, Rachel bought coffee, slipped into the restroom, and climbed out the window toward the loading bay. 30 seconds later, she was under the truck, attaching a GPS piggyback Diego had printed on a hacked 3D printer in the motel. The driver never noticed. 10 minutes later, the convoy, 2 SUVs and the box truck, rolled out. Rachel's team followed at a distance, silent except for the staccato click of Nate's fingernails drumming the teddy bear's plastic eye. When the convoy turned onto a gated Forest Service road, Rachel killed the headlights and whispered, ECH04. 4. The silo in the pines. Beyond the trees loomed a camouflaged silo-style bunker with a retractable roof. Floodlights bathed a concrete apron where personnel unloaded crates labeled medical waste and archive media. The interior access door slid apart, an iris revealing blackness. Rachel, Caleb, and Diego ducked low to the timberline. Nate stood, transfixed, rain washing rivulets of mud down his face. Same design, he murmured, always the same. Caleb offered him ear comms. We ghost in, grab what we can, documents, footage, anything. We're here 10 minutes tops. But Nate shook his head. There's someone in there. I heard a voice. Rachel blinked. You can tell? Air vents carry sound. He pointed at a louver near the roofline. Listen. Through the patter of rain, Rachel discerned faint cries, childlike, terrified. The plan hardened in her mind. This wasn't a raid for paperwork. It was a rescue. 10 minutes in hell. Using a maintenance shaft Nate remembered. They slipped into the facility. Pale LEDs flickered overhead. Warning placards, biohazard, psych reg, lined the corridor. A camera panned, but Caleb jammed it with a directional signal. They reached a reinforced door. Electronic keypad glowing. Nate kneeled, entered a 6-digit code, the same one Rachel used at ECH03. It beeped green. Inside, a dormitory cell lined with cots. 5 children sat against the wall, wrists wired to biometric cuffs. A teenage girl with shaved hair rose, eyes blazing defiance. Who are you? Rachel whispered. Friends. Alarms suddenly blared. Nate's code had triggered a silent failsafe. Red strobes painted the hall. Footsteps thundered. Caleb hustled children into the corridor. Diego guided them toward the shaft. Rachel grabbed a duffel of hard drives from a desk, slinging it over her shoulder. Nate stared at a 2-way mirror. Through it, a control room, a technician scrambling for a firearm. Rage flared in Nate's eyes. He crashed a chair through the glass, hauled the man out, and knocked him cold. Rachel shouted, Nate, we have to go. But he'd found something. A rack of sealed folders marked Cycle B, Child Unit logs. He stuffed them under his arm and ran. 6. Fire in the data center. They reached the service tunnel as guards rounded the corner. Caleb covered the retreat with suppressive fire from a flare pistol he'd rigged as a deterrent. In the chaos, sparks ignited wall insulation. Alarms shifted from intrusion to fire. At the tunnel exit, Rachel counted heads, 5 children. Caleb, Diego, but no Nate. She cursed, lunged back, but Caleb grabbed her. He's making sure we get out. A heartbeat later, Nate emerged, dragging a duffel larger than himself. Smoke billowed behind him. They sprinted into the pines, flames lighting the silo mouth like the throat of an angry god. Back at the pickup, Rachel sped off as explosions rocked the forest. Diego held the children, calming them with whispered Spanish lullabies he'd learned from his mother. Nate sat in the truck bed, rain and embers mixing on his skin, eyes fixed on the inferno until it disappeared behind trees. 7. A world ready to listen. By dawn, they reached a safe house Ben Sloan had arranged in Sacramento. The rescued children slept on couches. Caleb guarded the door. Nate handed Rachel the folders and a USB stick recovered from the control room. I'm done running, he said. If they want me, they'll hear my voice on every screen in America. Rachel placed a recorder on the table. Tell me everything, from the beginning. Nate took a breath, the first free breath of his life, and began. The first shot came at 3:14 a.m. A sharp crack split the night air outside the Sacramento safe house. Caleb Huxley was already awake. The sound yanked Rachel out of a shallow sleep on the floor. And Diego froze mid-sentence as he tried to read a bedtime story to one of the rescued kids. Caleb dove toward the window and pulled the curtains tight. Sniper, he growled. North Ridge, just a warning. Rachel's phone buzzed. A message from Ben Sloan. One line. Blackwater is active. You've got 1 hour. Protocol Blackwater. A scorched earth contingency initiated when classified programs were on the verge of public exposure. Rachel had only heard rumors, whispers in journalistic blacklists and half-redacted testimonies. It wasn't just cleanup, it was erasure. Data, locations, witnesses, people. They had 1 hour before a hit team made everyone in that house vanish like the Camden family almost had. 1. The upload window. We move now, Rachel ordered, eyes on the external hard drive that had everything. Nate's testimony, biometric logs, intercepted communications, and the full Long Watch facility list. We upload from 3 points. Redundancy or we fail. Diego was already stuffing flash drives into a backpack. I'll go to the library's public terminal downtown. No trace. I'll take the cafe, Caleb said, tossing his old revolver into a gym bag. Rachel grabbed the third drive. I'll use the journalism lab at the university. Their network's unfiltered. They all knew it was a suicide split. But this was bigger than survival now. Nate stepped in from the kitchen. His voice was low, but clear. I'm going with her. Rachel met his gaze, tired, ferocious, unshakable. Are you sure? He nodded. I'm done hiding. I want to press the send button myself. 2. Into the city. 30 minutes later, Rachel's dusty Subaru pulled into the back lot of Cal State Sacramento. The journalism building sat dark, locked after hours, but Rachel still had her adjunct access credentials from a semester-long workshop she once taught. Inside, Nate stared at the rows of unused terminals and flickering green monitors. This was a world he'd been denied. Shelves of books, quiet air, soft light, a world built for growth, not control. He sat down at the center station, hands hovering over the keyboard. Do you know what to say? Rachel asked. He looked at her. No, he said honestly. But I know what I want people to feel. He clicked begin upload. 3. The black SUVs. At 3:48 a.m., 2 matte black SUVs turned off Highway 50 and onto the university campus. At the cafe downtown, Caleb was halfway through uploading to a VPN in Sweden when a truck smashed through the front window. He grabbed the hard drive, ducked behind a counter, and fired once. A man in tactical gear crumpled. Another returned fire. Caleb took a round to the shoulder and fell, blood painting the tile red. At the public library, Diego had completed 68% of the upload when the power cut out. A blackout. He yanked the drive, sprinted to the fire exit, and used the stolen Wi-Fi signal of a nearby apartment complex to finish the upload through his phone. 89%. 93%. At the university, Rachel heard tires screech. We've got to move, she said, pulling Nate from the chair. Leave the upload running. They'll trace it if we stall. But Nate didn't move. He stared at the screen. 99%, 100%. The upload flashed. Distribution to 48 servers successful. Archival encrypted. He stood, turned to Rachel, and said quietly, it's done. 4. The chase. They exited the journalism lab seconds before 2 men in unmarked tactical gear entered through the front. Rachel and Nate bolted across the quad, toward the campus maintenance tunnels. Caleb had shown her them years ago. As they reached the exit gate, Rachel looked back and saw one of the men stop at the workstation Nate had used. The screen showed, file copied, streaming live. The man swore. Too late. The world was already watching. 5. What the World Saw. By 4:35 a.m., the first leaks appeared on encrypted forums. Then Reddit. Then journalists' inboxes. By sunrise, hashtags were trending. Hashtag Longwatch Files. Hashtag Nate Camden Speaks. Hashtag Echo Children. The video showed Nate, sitting in a motel room, holding the rusted teddy bear. My name is Nathaniel Camden. For 10 years I lived in the woods because my father believed the world was trying to poison us. But what he didn't know is that someone else planted that belief in his head. They gave him the materials, the methods. They called it an experiment. They called me a Category C subject. My sister Ellie died in that cage. And if you're watching this, it means I finally got to tell you what they did to her. To me, to others still locked in places like Echo 4. You can't undo the past, but you can stop it from happening again. The video included biometric logs, photos of the facility, and a list of living child units across the country, some still in isolation. The public exploded. Within 6 hours, politicians were forced to respond. By day's end, the Joint Task Division issued a public statement of deep concern and ongoing internal investigation. But they were too late. The story had broken the surface, and nothing could sink it again. 6. Reckoning. Rachel, Nate, Diego, and the surviving children were granted temporary protective custody under the Whistleblower Security Act. Caleb Huxley survived surgery and would eventually testify before a federal ethics committee, wearing his Ranger's badge like a shield. Diego returned home to a mother who wept for hours and never let go of his hand. Rachel declined all book deals, all interviews. I'm not the story, she said. He is. As for Nate, he didn't give another interview. But 2 months later, a nationwide candlelight vigil was held at the Pine Grove in Pinevale. Thousands showed up. Nate stood beside a newly placed marble marker. Ellie Camden 2012 to 2016. The girl who was never supposed to be heard. Now she's never forgotten. Book epilogue. A world with eyes open. 6 months later, 3 Longwatch sites were raided by joint military and FBI task forces. Dozens of children were recovered. Hundreds of files seized. A senator resigned. Another disappeared. A law was passed banning covert psychological programs involving minors under any pretense, labeled the Camden Act. But some dots on the map remained red. Some bunkers went dark before they were found. And some voices never got the chance to speak. Still, in a quiet house in Oregon, a 17-year-old boy writes every day in a notebook. Not because he has to, but because now, finally, he can.